Hello and welcome to the Tank Club. Today we're thrilled to bring you an in-depth exploration of the formidable AoE Mage Tank known as the Blackguard. This unique build masterfully blends defensive prowess with explosive area of effect damage, robust self-healing and exceptional survivability, offering an exhilarating gameplay experience. Our journey will uncover the secrets to maximizing the Blackguard's potential, focusing on gathering numerous enemies and swiftly decimating them. Join us as we unveil the strategies that make the Blackguard a powerhouse on the battlefield in Ravendawn. So to create a Blackguard class, you are going to need protection, wizardry and spiritual, and that will create the Blackguard. Now for this build, I have leveled up a lot of other archetypes. And the reason for that is because of the extra skill points that we gain here. As you can see, we've got 36 points from our active types and then an additional 13 for the inactive types. So it's really good and it's really valuable to get a lot of skill points so you can play this build like much better, much easier, much sooner. The longer you take to kind of get the skill points, the more difficult it'll be to start off with. So it is really useful to get as many skill points as you can. So we're going to look through the different skills and the different passives that we've got for this Blackguard build, and the main focus is on AoE damage and survival. So the main thing we've got here is protection. Now we use protection to give us that defensive strength. So we've got bash, which we don't use this skill. This is just a skill we have to take so we can unlock the next one. And then we use Spirit's Resolve. Now Spirit's Resolve gives us a nice heal to ourselves, and it is quite a big heal as well. It's one of the biggest heals that we'll get. And with the right Raven card, this is also going to be boosted a lot depending on the severity of your wounds. When we look down at the next one, we've got Spirit Shield, so it increases your defense by 10% for 8 seconds, also decreases your attack for the same duration, which is a slight issue, but it is going to be super helpful in surviving in the way that we're going to play this build. And it will increase your defense additionally based on the amount of Aether you're using as well. The next skill is Blessed Earth. So it deals spell damage per second in an area. It heals every second for every target hit for 6 seconds. And then increases damage and healing based on Aether consumed. So we're losing damage here, but we're gaining damage here. So that kind of counterbalances it a little bit. Next we've got Provoke, which is the next skill we use. And this is a taunt skill. And we don't use this because it's a taunt. We're going to use this because of the Ravencards. The Ravencards that attach to this skill are super powerful. And they're going to give you a lot of damage. The skill that we would be using next would be Unbreakable to absorb 50% of the damage you receive for 5 seconds. When it ends, all damage received during Unbreakable is healed back to you over 5 seconds. So another really useful defensive skill that you can use, especially when you start getting to those higher levels. At the current stage I'm at with this level 36 setup Blackguard, the enemies that I'm fighting are sort of level 33 to 38. So it's not necessary at the minute, but once I start pushing those much harder enemies, the ones that do more damage, that is going to be essential. And the passive we take here is Divine Purpose. Whenever you receive healing from any source, your defense increased by 0.5% for 6 seconds up to 20 stacks. This effect can occur once every 1 second. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using skills that will give this to us to increase our defensive capability so that we're able to survive being boxed in by 8 enemies at a time. And that is going to be extremely valuable for doing that. Now, other passives that we are going to use later down the line would be Guardian. So when you're below 8% health, damage you receive has a 5% chance to activate Guardian, heals 1% of your total health per second for 10 seconds. Guardian can be activated once every 30 seconds. So this syncs quite well with the way that you play this build. You're not going to be active in fights constantly. So like having it every 30 seconds means probably every time you do a big pull of enemies, you've got a chance of activating this, which is going to be really good for survival. And then we are going to get Giant Blood as well, which increases your health by 10%. Having that extra health is very strong for this build. Okay, next we've got Wizardry, and this is your main source of all damage, and this is as well really powerful. So we've got 2 different ways to play this. You've got your single target or you've got your AoE setup. So this current setup is my main AoE setup. We've got Fireball. Now we don't use this skill. Like we don't use Bash, we're not going to use Fireball. The only time I'll use Fireball is when I'm using Wizardry as my main thing to level up my other archetypes. So I will use Fireball in that situation, otherwise I don't use it. Next we have Erupt. Again, this is a skill you kind of have to take to get to the stronger ones further down, but it is good for single targets. So it deals spell damage, applies 3 stacks of deep burning on the target. Each deep burning deals spell damage every 3 seconds, reduces the healing received, it applies an additional burning stack for the Aether consumed, so it will help when you're doing that single target combat. Now, if you are going for single target, you are going to want to use Pyroblast. So this is a really good skill. It deals a big amount of damage to the target, and it does have a slight channel, and it reduces the channel based on the amount of Aether consumed. So if you've got like a lot of Aether, then you can use that to maximum effect. And this is, like I say, really essential. If you're in a cave and you go in one enemy to the next enemy to the next enemy, having Pyroblast will help with that. In the kind of gameplay style I'm going to show you today, we're not using it because we're focusing on big area damage. And to start that is Combustion. So this isn't your main skill, but it's a really useful skill. So this will be used in your rotation for doing extra AoE damage. So it's only a small area, but you get like a bit of AoE damage, 220 spell damage to a small area around the target, and it stuns them. And that's one of the critical parts of this, is it's going to stop the enemies from doing attacks to you. So because it stuns, it stops them attacking, it stops them doing things to you, it stops their major attacks. So when they're channeling an attack, you can hit this, and then it's going to stop them from doing it. The bread and butter of the Blackguard is Flame Tornado. So cast the Flame Tornado at the target location, dealing 132 spell damage per second to all targets in a small area. Flame Tornado lasts for 5 seconds. Damage is applied 0.1 seconds faster per 10 Aether consumed. So we're going to try and make sure we use Aether when we're using this. We also are going to always place this on top of yourself. So if you put it on yourself, you can hit 8 enemies around you. So if you're surrounded, throw it on yourself, everything's going to get hit. So it's a really, really strong skill for damage. And then finally, we're going to use Meteor Strike. So this isn't going to be active all the time. It's got a 90-second cooldown, which is a very, very long time, but it's going to do a huge amount of damage. So this is like the final skill you use in a rotation. You hit everything, and if enemies have still got health, you cast this, and it will drop down. The only downside to this skill is it does have a channel, so it's a very risky skill to use. Sometimes you just can't use it because it has that risk element where you're not able to cast a healing skill, but you are able to use a health potion. So depending on your situation, if your potion is on cooldown, you would not use it. If your potion's off cooldown, you could use it because then you've got the backup of, right, I need to hit a potion, and then you can use it. In terms of the passives, we've got Havoc. So your crit strikes have a 15% chance to increase your spell damage for 8 seconds up to 3 stacks. This is really important. So we're going to be building a lot of spell damage on this build, and this is going to help us to really try and push towards that soft cap on spell damage. The other passive we've got is Amplification, so increases the damage of your skills by 8% at a cost of 25% more mana or health. So our skills are more expensive, but we do more damage. And this build is a burst style damage gameplay. It's not like, it's not going to cause an issue. If you were playing single target, maybe you wouldn't want to use this as much because you couldn't really afford to be spending 25% more mana every single skill when you're doing like single target enemy to enemy to enemy. But when you're stacking everything up, burning it down, waiting a few seconds, moving on to the next pull, it's definitely essential. The next thing would be Hot-Headed. Hot-Headed is the one I'm going to take. So whenever you deal damage with a skill and it does not crit hit, you gain 2% crit chance until you have a critical hit. So depending on the way that you go with your gear, you can go with Hot-Headed or you can go with Flow of Magic. So every 1% mana spent gives you a Flow of Magic stack for 10 seconds. Each Flow of Magic stack increases the crit damage of your next crit hit. So if you've got a low crit hit already, you'll go with Hot-Headed to try and increase the chance to get a crit attack. If you've got high crit and you want more crit damage, then obviously you'll go with Flow of Magic. So for me, I'm going with Hot-Headed. I'm then going to use Impact Gear, which is going to increase my critical damage. So I'm going to get more crit damage and I'm going to get more crit chance, and I'm stacking those two things together to get more DPS. When we move on to Spiritual, the next skill is Cyclone. This is the main spammable skill. So the skill that has a low cost, it's a spammable skill that you can use on the global cooldown. So we're going to keep hitting this, and this does bounce damage. So cast a Cyclone, it deals spell damage to the target. Every third cast bounces off to 2 other targets within a medium area around the target, dealing spell damage to the main target and a bit to the others. If Cyclone doesn't bounce, it deals additional damage. So we're using this skill more so than this one because while this is decent enough, this one is really, really strong because it can hit 3 targets at a time and it does a lot of damage. It bounces between enemies, and the card that we're going to use with it as well makes it even stronger. Next we've got Regenerate, so we've got a nice heal over time, so we've already got our burst heal, so we don't need another burst heal, but it's nice to have the option of a heal over time as well that's going to tick, it's going to give us constant healing, and it's also going to help us to proc this Divine Purpose. So when this is active and it's ticking away, this is going to be building up our stacks and increasing our defense, which is very, very essential. We've also got Barrier, so create a barrier around the target that absorbs 252, expiring after 8 seconds, and absorbs additional damage per Aether consumed. This is a good skill to have. We're going to kind of precast this as we're stacking enemies. So as we're going into a fight, we're going to be pulling lots of enemies together. While we're doing that, we're going to hit Barrier to kind of reduce that down a little bit, the damage that we're taking while doing so. And then we get Air Aura. So we're going to enchant ourselves with a Wind Aura for 2 seconds. After the Wind Aura expires, the target gains 200% of the damage taken as a shield. And so we're going to give ourselves a nice big shield because we're going to be taking a ton of damage. So this is going to help us to get that massive, massive shield. Other skills I'm going to use once we have enough skill points later down the line include Wind Strike Spirit. And then we're also going to use Haste as well. And on the passives, I do intend to take Wind Mastery, so your target will support or friendly skills have a 50% chance to increase the target's haste by 10%. Wind Mastery can stack up to 3 times. So we're going to get that as well into this build. Now if we have a quick look at the order that I'm going to build this is what it kind of looks like. So as you can see the numbers on the skills, this is the order I intend to pick up these skills. So obviously number 1 will be Cyclone because that's our main spammable skill, but then we focus mostly into Wizardry for a bit there to take obviously all of our damage skills and some of our main passives. But then we move over to Protection where we take a heal, we take our defensive cooldowns, we take the passive, and then obviously we move on to Spiritual where we pick up the essential skills and passives here, and then we just kind of fill this build out with everything else afterwards. Now let's look at the Ravencards. So we don't have a Ravencard slotted for Bash because we're not using it. Then when we move on to Spirit's Resolve, we use Hoglet. Spirit's Resolve mana cost is doubled when you are 30% health or lower, but the healing is increased. So if it's a legendary card, it'll be 170% more healing. I've healed with this for 500, 600, 700 when it's crit, when I'm low on health. So it's a really, really good heal. It's one of the best heals that I've seen for this particular build. I've tried other different types of healing, but this is a massive, massive heal. And especially when you use Hoglet, it's going to give you that extra nice boost as well when you are low on health. On Spirit Shield, we are going to use Thrall Gladiator. So Spirit Shield reflects 36% of damage taken as spell damage. So because this reduces our attack power, but it is going to return damage back at the enemy as well. So while this may be like a skill that you don't like the look of because it's reducing your attack power, it works very, very well. It gives you that survival that you need, but you're also getting the additional damage from Thrall Gladiator that's going to output DPS back to the enemy. When it comes to Blessed Earth, you can use both of the Raven cards for this one. I like Lava Cap Mushroom. Blessed Earth does not heal you anymore, but the damage is increased by 36%. So it's a big damage increase onto this skill, and understandably some people might not want to go with this because it's not healing anymore. Now if you are struggling to survive, you can switch to Morningstar Judge. You and party members inside the area will receive increased healing, so you'll get extra healing from it. It is like a more of a group favourite morph as well, so if you are going to be doing some group or duo content, then maybe Morningstar Judge is a little bit better. But generally Lava Cap Mushroom is the better performer, but Morningstar Judge is a good option if you want the additional survival. Next we've got Provoke, and again this is another one where both cards are very strong. It will depend on how you want to go with it. So my preference is the Orc card, which Provoke increases the attack power of all targets hit, but decreases their defense power. So if you had the legendary card, enemies will do 19% more damage to you, but they have decreased defensive power by 36%. So that means you're going to do more damage to them, a lot more than what they're doing to you. So it's a bit of a risk versus reward situation. If you didn't want to take the risk of receiving more damage, maybe you are struggling to survive already, Minotaur Champion will make your life a lot easier because for every enemy affected by Provoke, you gain defense power for 6 seconds, up to a maximum of 3 stacks. So with the legendary card, 12% more defense power, times 3, so you can be increasing your own defense by a ton by having Minotaur Champion. So this is another strong option. Orc will definitely boost your damage a lot, but Minotaur Champion is an option if you need that extra survival. When we look at Unbreakable, we've got Iceforge Hallkeeper. This skill, Unbreakable, no longer heals you, and you will not be able to receive any healing for the duration of Unbreakable. So again, it's kind of another risk. So it really depends. Do you want to take the risk for this huge, awesome damage, or are you going to play it a bit safer? For me, again, Ice Forge is the one I go for. It will burst around you, dealing 120% of the damage you receive as spell power damage. You are going to get the shield still, so it's absorbing 50% of all damage received for 5 seconds. So this is a 5-second duration. Now, if we take away the healing, that just means for those 5 seconds, it's going to absorb 50% of the damage, and then it's going to output that as damage back to the enemy again. So it's another great option for outputting more damage. When we go onto Spiritual, obviously Cyclone's our main skill we're going to be using as our spammable. We're going to use a card that matches that. Naturalist Mage increases Whirlwind bounce damage by 96% if it's in Legendary. Obviously, if it's not quite Legendary, it's still very strong. So you're going to get that increased damage with Naturalist Mage. So that's definitely essential because we want to have that extra bounce damage. That's the whole point of using this skill, is so we can hit 3 enemies at a time with it and we get the bounce. When we get that increased damage, very, very effective. With Regenerate, obviously a heal over time, we want to get this Toad card. Targets affected by Barrier now receive 60% increased healing amount from Regenerate. So we are going to be using Barrier. So we're going to want to use Barrier before we use Regenerate, and then Regenerate is going to be buffed by Toad. So a great option again. And then we look at the Barrier card. If your Barrier breaks or expires on the target, it will explode and deal 240% spell power damage around the target. So it's an AoE burst damage when it expires. Now this isn't just when the shield runs out. So once it runs out or it gets used up, it will explode. So either way, great card to go with. It's more damage. This is kind of like your pre-skill before you go into a fight. Activate this and then it's do damage as soon as the fight, as soon as you're into your stack. The Air Aura card is Rune Gust Jackal. Air Aura now returns 120% of basic attack damage to the attacker whenever you are already affected by the shield. So just outputting again more damage back to the enemy. That is the way we want to go. For Windstrike Spirit, we've got Mr. Cat Mushroom. The target of Windstrike Spirit will generate a shield of 32.5% of the damage dealt by Windstrike Spirit. And then the last one for Spiritual is Goblin Tinker. Skills and basic attacks made by targets affected by your haste skill will shock their targets, dealing 48% adaptive damage, and this effect can occur once every 1 second. So another really, really good one. On Wizardry, you obviously don't need to take a card for Wizardry on the first skill, but if you are going to play single target, maybe you are going to use this as you're leveling up, then do take Goblin Wizard. So Fireball critical hits have a chance to reduce the cooldown of Pyroblast. And that would be really essential because Pyroblast is a skill you're going to use in single target situations. So this is a good single target option to use then, because Pyroblast, you want to have that back more often. It's got a 30-second cooldown, but if you can get it reduced, then it's really good because this deals a lot of damage back at the enemy. On Erupt, you want to go for Emberglow Trunk. Targets affected by Erupt take increased critical damage from skills. So again, you want to put this on the enemy first, and then you want to hit them with a Pyroblast, for example, and that means they're going to take potentially more damage. For Combustion, we want to take the Ember Scale Drake. Applies a Burning Ember stack to targets affected by Combustion. Burning Ember explodes after 3 seconds, dealing spell power damage to every target around the explosion. So as you can see, the kind of theme here is everything is like explosive, it's AoE, it's area damage. Everything we're doing is built around that. Flame Tornado, we've got Flame Lord Jin. So Flame Tornado damage now has a 50% chance to apply a Scorch stack on the target for 8 seconds, dealing 3% spell power damage every second per stack, up to 10 stacks. So especially when you are fighting stronger enemies in the future, this is going to be a massive, massive plus. And then the last one, Meteor Strike, we're going to be using Astor Demon. So Meteor Strike now creates a fire hazard around the area it falls onto, dealing 60% spell power spell damage for 6 seconds to targets inside the hazard area. So this means that when you put this down, it does a huge damage hit on impact, and then it leaves an AoE on the floor, just burning enemies up for 6 more seconds. So if it doesn't quite wipe enemies out, there's a good chance that the left behind part will definitely contribute towards that. Okay, next we're looking at the stats and attributes. So for this build, the main focus is going to be on an intelligence. So you want to put 80% of your points into intelligence. You want to be using 20% into wisdom. As you can see here, it's a bit varied now because of my gear. I've recently put some things. I've got enchants on my gear, so that's buffed up my intelligence a bit more than I anticipated. And I do have some bits in vitality as well. So increase max health, regen, spell defense, weapon defense. That is good. If you wanted to, you can switch these points out and split them between wisdom and intelligence. But you do want to stack a lot into intelligence for that spell power and that healing power. And then you do need a little bit in wisdom because spell defense, mana regen, max mana, and healing power is really, really strong and very, very essential for this build. So when you are looking at gear and different things like that, you need to focus on stuff that provides that intelligence bonus, and then maybe secondary, it's got wisdom. For your secondary stats, you're going to be looking at spell power. So as you can see here, we've got a 220 spell power currently. Healing power is pretty important, but not the most essential thing. Obviously, we naturally get that from our intelligence already and from wisdom. For our secondary attributes, we are really looking at that impact as well. So impact is another option. So you can either stack in to spell power or impact. Now, what you want to be careful of is when these numbers on the side here are orange, that means you've reached the soft cap. So you need to start trying to distribute into other things, because there's no point really stacking more when you've reached that soft cap. So if your numbers are in orange, so for example, if you stack lots into an intelligence, maybe your spell power is then maxed out, you want to start switching it maybe over to wisdom. You can't just go full intelligence, because you will be at that soft cap. So it is good to split a few points into wisdom. If you want that extra bit of safety, going into vitality is really helpful as well. And like I said, when we look at equipment, we want to go with 4 plate armor. And plate armor is just so strong, because max health, healing received, and weapon defense, all incredibly useful. The way we're playing this build, where we stack 8 enemies around ourselves and try to burn them all down, we can't really afford to be playing with a build that's too squishy. So having that extra survival benefit is definitely more useful. In the longer term, you might want to switch it out for cloth. That is up to you. But I really like to use the plate armor. Now, as I said, you want to be looking for here, primary attributes on your gear should be intelligence. So the orange stat needs to be intelligence. If you can get an additional stat on that, as you can see, I've got dexterity and intelligence. We've got intelligence on this one, intelligence and wisdom there, and then intelligence and wisdom there as well. So we're benefiting both, but intelligence, every time you upgrade this gear, it's going to buff that intelligence stat if you've got that as your main primary. On your secondary attributes, as I mentioned, impact is the one I've gone for. That's the one in green, so that has to be the green attribute for your secondary. If it's not green, it's not going to upgrade when you upgrade your gear. On my weapon, I did go for vitality on my weapon, plus 12 vitality. The main thing here is you always want to try and upgrade the weapon first, and your weapon is really important because you've got your weapon skill. That's the main thing that's affected by your weapon, is the weapon skill that you gain. Mana overcharge increases the damage of your skills by 10% at the cost of 15% mana or health for 10 seconds. So we're going to get increased damage when we use this. We're going to go over the rotation in a moment. But yeah, that is the main thing. Upgrade your weapon as like the main priority. Try and get it to gold quality. Upgrade your gear to blue quality. Upgrade your weapon to gold. And then slowly upgrade your gear to purple. But like this gear is good for the current level that I'm at, the current content I'm doing. I'm able to kill enemies in a complete stack around myself, and that is how it's functioning currently. Obviously for your jewelry and things like that, I'm using the Berserker Talisman, increases your attack power and haste. So you want to be kind of looking for anything that increases attack power is absolutely essential. You've got to be increasing attack power. For jewelry as well, increases your intelligence and wisdom by 3, increases your vitality and intelligence by 4. So anything that you get from the Rangers Guild, anything that you can get from quests that buffs intelligence, wisdom, or attack power are the 3 most important things you're looking for. Anything that increases those. With your trinket, there's a few different options. Obviously for this one, I've got the Lucky Charm, which is going to give me extra silver. But if you're fighting pirates, for example, Pirate's Hook, absolutely vital. It will increase your attack power against creatures from the pirate family by 14%. So you've got to really look out for different things like this that are going to passively buff up your attack power for the enemy type you're fighting. If you've got like an amulet, for example, that maybe increases your attack power to goblins by 7, then obviously that's going to perform better than the Berserker Talisman. So you've got to really look at your jewelry and your trinkets and maybe the enemy type you're fighting and customize your build towards that. One of the other things that's absolutely essential is your food and consumables. So you should be using food with this build. So I'm using cookies that increase my attack power by 6. I can craft better stuff than this, but food can become quite pricey. It really depends on what you're doing. But yeah, getting some food in there. This really makes a huge, huge difference. If I don't use cookies when I'm fighting a full stack of enemies, sometimes I don't quite have enough damage to kill them. I'll just be like a few % off killing the enemy, and then I've got 8 enemies that are still alive and killing me instead. So having that cookies just pushes you over that edge where you can just do that little bit more damage, and then it's absolutely essential to do so. Another thing is using mana regen and health regen, so you can combine both of these at the same time. So I use whiskey, or you can use something more advanced. You definitely want to have something, if you want something cheaper, you've got vodka in there as well, and that's really, really good for kind of giving you that bit of regen. You've also got beer and different like recovery foods, so once you are at the end of a fight, you do have a little bit of a gap in between when you're able to go again, at which point using beer to restore health and mana faster. You've also got other foods that you can also use, so you can use a drink, you can use something like cookies, but then you can also use a buff food as well. So a food that will increase your stats. You could go with vitality or you could go with intelligence. It depends kind of what you're after. If you want to max out your intelligence, go for intelligence food, maybe some wisdom or some vitality food. It is completely up to you, but definitely make sure you're using buff foods in this build. You also really want to be using stones because although it's only a small amount, using one is going to increase the attack power by 2 because it's a two-handed weapon that we use. If you use stronger ones, it'll be even more. So definitely make sure you're using these because they're super cheap to buy. They're really cheap to craft and easy to craft as well. So make sure you've got stones active as well to give you that increased attack power, because attack power is really, really important for how good you're going to be in this build. So when we look at the rotation and how to play, there is a very precise way to kind of play this build as you're going into combat. Now, if we think about an AoE situation, the one thing that you want to be doing is making sure you've always got more than 80% health. You don't want to start the fight when you've got the stack and you're already at half health. That's a problem. So when you're going into fights, use your Spirit's Resolve to give you that boost of health, to make sure you've got as much health as possible, ready for when you reach the full stack. Now, as you're going into a stack, when you pick up the first enemy and you're running them, because what the idea is you're running from one enemy to the next, you're trying to bring in as many as you can handle and kill them all at the same time. So what you need to do is, I always like to use barrier first. So I go and take the first enemy, maybe the second, I hit the barrier, I then start bringing them to the point where I want them to be stacked, then I hit my regenerate. Now this is going to bring my health up, and it's also going to start proccing this Divine Purpose passive. So it's going to start increasing my defense as we're going in. Now, this doesn't increase your defense if it doesn't heal you. So regenerate could be ticking, but if it's not giving you any healing, it's not increasing your defense. The main purpose of this is to increase the defense. So we activate regenerate and we go into the stack. Now, by this point, barrier is going to start to run out. It's going to explode. Your regenerate is going to take over and start healing you up. And then once you get to your final destination, your stack point, that's when you start your rotation. Now, the first one is Spirit Shield. So you hit your Spirit Shield straight away, and then you want to throw down a Blessed Earth. Now, after that, then you hit Provoke, which is going to give you that defensive buff, or it's going to give you that increased damage to the enemy. Next, you hit Aura, and that's going to give you that shield. And then you've got to throw down a Flame Tornado. So you've got to place that down over the top of your character. Now, this is the point where everything's kind of going off. So Flame Tornado, as soon as that has been pressed, you hit Mana Overcharge. That's going to increase the amount of damage that everything's doing. At this point, you need to decide what to do next. So you can either go with a Combustion to maybe stun the enemy and do a bit of extra damage. If you've got a full 8 stack around your character, Meteor Strike is the next option. You have to throw this down over them to make sure they die. The only trouble is this is a very risky skill. So you cannot use Meteor Strike if your potion is off cooldown. So you should always be using health potions with this build, and you want to use them kind of as your Meteor Strike is channeling, because it does take a few seconds. Throw the Meteor Strike down, get ready to hit your potion just in case you need to heal. If you don't need to do that, you can use Combustion, and then you can also just stand there while your Flame Tornado does all the damage. And while that's happening, you hit your barrier, because your barrier is going to obviously protect you for a few seconds. It's going to explode for some more AoE damage. You could hit your regenerate again, which is going to keep bringing up those defensive stacks. And if you need a heal, you can burst yourself with Spirit's Resolve. And then aside from that, it's just a case of tabbing onto a target, spamming E, in my case here with my spammable skill Cyclone, and just hitting that, try and get it to bounce between the enemies to finish them off. So that is the general rotation. We don't really use Erupt because Erupt is single target, so that's just there for, like I say, when I'm doing those single target situations, but that is my main portion of my rotation. Just to look at some pros and cons of the Blackguard build. So some of the pros of this build, it's a lot of fun to play. It's a very full-on kind of gameplay style. It's an exciting gameplay style. There's a lot of risk versus reward, so it is an exciting, fun build to play. It's got great defensive capabilities, which are really good. Gives you that survival. It allows you to tank lots of enemies at a time, and they've got great AoE damage and self-sustain. So not only have you got that defensive capability, but you can kill enemies very quickly, very easily. You've got great self-sustain to survive and get through all those combat situations. It's really good because it does cover multiple roles of tank and damage. So especially when you're doing duo content, you could be with a partner, stacking things together, and like they might be playing a healer or a healer damage dealer or just a pure damage build, And it's really good because you can provoke and pull enemies together, and you can both just absolutely shred through it. And it's really, really good for duo fights as well. Now, this build performs most optimally in open areas where you've got a lot of space to kind of run and stack and pull things together and get lots of enemies all pulled in. That's when it works at its peak, when you can be surrounded by 8 enemies and just burn through them. And you will gain really, really fast experience while using this build. Now, on the flip side to that, for the cons, it is quite weak single target. You will have to switch your build to get that single target impact. It can be a bit of a problem, single target fights, because we're using basically 2 support archetypes and then 1 damage. So accessing damage in single target environments can be quite tricky, and also you've got quite a lot of long cooldowns. Now, although the build is very fast paced in a way where you're pulling enemies together, you're burning them down, it's a very slow build in terms of the way that it functions, because the way you're playing is pulling enemies into a stack, you're burning them down, and you're basically burning through all of your mana, most of your health, and pretty much all of your cooldowns. So the problem you've got is every time you kill a stack of enemies, you've then got to wait anywhere between 15 and 30 seconds before you can then move on and do another pull. Now, if you are playing it to its biggest potential, where you pull in 8 enemies at a time and killing them all, then that won't be a massive issue, because you're still gaining a ton of experience, and it's definitely a lot faster than going from one enemy to the next, to the next, to the next. It's much quicker, but it feels kind of slow because you are waiting around a lot. So that is a bit of a downside for me, is sometimes there can be aspects of it that are boring. When you're in combat, it's very exciting and very fast paced, but then the sitting around waiting for your cooldowns and mana to come back is quite slow. Another con is that it's a risky to play build. Like, you have got to surround yourself. It is a risk. Sometimes you're really pushing it to the last few percent of your health. So there's a lot of risk involved, but there's a big reward in terms of the big XP gains. It's a lot of fun, a lot of excitement, but there is a risk there. And it can be difficult in enclosed spaces like caves and things like that. Like when you're in enclosed areas, it is a bit more difficult to play than when you're kind of out in the open or in a very spacious area. So I hope you've enjoyed this build. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. For the written build, you can go and check it out on my website, thetankclub.com. And obviously, if you need any help with anything in Ravendawn, come and join me over on the Tank Club Discord, where we're happy to answer any questions you might have about the game. Thank you very much to all of our supporters, our patrons, our YouTube members. That's very much appreciated. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.